Faith without works is dead. As the body, apart from the spirit, is dead, so faith without works is dead. He is not proposing that I substitute works for faith. Works are the evidence whether the faith I profess is alive or dead. I say I believe the story of Scripture. Well then, if you believe it, then do it. Said, whatever you desire, believe you have received, and you shall. Well, if I really believe that, I can't say I believe by quoting the Apostles' Creed. That's not belief. Going to church and genuflecting before some man-made little cross, that's not Scripture. Do you really believe the doctrines, the teachings of Scripture? Not the traditions of men, not the rituals, not the outer ceremonies, but the teachings of Scripture. When you pray, believe that you have received and you will. And all things are possible to him who believes. But do I believe that? Well, then believe it. If I really believe I am out of the army, what and where would I be? Well, I would be at home, in my place, 1,000 miles away on Washington Square. If I look through the window, I would see the Holly Apartments. If I look to the left, I will see Washington Square. If I look to the right, I will see 6th Avenue. It's now called the Avenue of the Americas. But then, and still is to me, raised as I was there, it's still 6th Avenue to me. And there I would look at 6th Avenue. Well, I did that night. I saw 6th Avenue. I saw Washington Square. And then I went through the entire apartment and touched these objects with my imaginary hands. Now, was that rational? The world will say that was the most irrational thing that one can do. Now, what is reason? The office of reason is simply to extract, conclusions from premises. Must my premises always be based upon the evidence of my senses? Must they always dictate what is rational to me? Well, having done this and proven it to be a fact, reason doesn't mean to me what it means to the world. For there was sleep in the army, and I wrote a friend of mine who was a Freudian, and he practiced psychiatry in New York City. He was drafted, he was an Englishman too, and he was drafted and he was off in Florida, a man my age. And so when I got out, knowing exactly what I did, I wrote him a detailed letter telling him what I did and how to do it. No, he was a Freudian, and that was something that didn't make sense to him. To him, the whole thing was centered in sex, not in this use of the imagination. But all right. He didn't answer my letter. I got out in 1943, in the spring, in the month of April. Or was it March? March or April of 1943. They drafted me November the 19th, 1942, and I got out in March 1943. When the war was over and all the other fellows were being discharged, he was discharged. And he said to me afterwards, you know, Neville, I love to come to your lectures and to hear you because it's interesting, it's fairy. You turn my daily bread into the substance of fairy. But while I listen to, you know what I do? I put my feet right down into the carpet and I hold on to the sides of the chair to keep my sense of the reality and the profundity of things. For he kept on holding his little cot in the army for another 3 years because he couldn't let go and put himself where he wanted to be. So I am telling you how it's done. I am telling you how it's done from my own experience. That my perceptions are not necessarily bounded by organs of perception. I perceive more than sense, no matter how acute they are, could discover. My senses couldn't discover what I am seeing. Only in my imagination could it be done. I'm seeing the Holly Apartments. I am seeing 6th Avenue. I am seeing Union Square. I am seeing the bed, my wife, my child. I hadn't seen them in 3 months, but they're all there. I didn't bring sex into it. No, I didn't go to bed with her. There she was, the girl I loved. She was in her own bed, and I in my own bed. We have twin beds. And my little girl was then just over a year. She was born, not quite a year. She was born in June of 1942, and this was not yet June of 1943. So she was not yet a year old. Here's my sweet little child, Vicky, in her bed. And I walked through the entire thing and touched all the objects and felt them so normal and so natural. Came back to my bed and slept in it. If anyone was sensitive in that room, they would have seen me sleeping there. I was so natural to myself that they would have seen me actually sleeping there. And then the next day, he had a change of mind, but he couldn't act upon it. He was resisting that change. But that which I have done, do nothing. So he resisted it for 9 days, and then he called me in and told me to bring a new application, which I did, and that day I was out. So I tell you how it works. This is the most practical law in the world. He looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty. Well, doesn't that liberate you? If you look into the law of liberty, then what are you now? The man, the woman you really want to be, but then you're in prison, though you're not behind bars. You are in prison by your present concept. You're not behind bars. You're going to go home tonight and sleep as the woman, as the man you really don't want to be. So you are in prison. Now look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere. Do not only be a hearer of what to do, do it. And you will be blessed in the doing. That's what Scripture teaches. Go home and read it. I am not misquoting. I am quoting accurately from the Epistle of James in the New Testament. And this is the story that I'm trying to tell everyone in the world. He said, I am not in prison. No, you're not in prison. Not physically. But you are in prison. You may today need money. And you say, oh, I'm still not like the fellows who are behind in Sing Sing. All right, you're not behind jail doors, but you are still behind. Behind in rent, behind in this, and the dunning notes from all the places where you charge, you are behind bars. You can't seem to find the necessary sum to pay them. All right, look into the perfect law of liberty. That's the perfect law. Well, how do I do it? Rearrange the structure of your mind. The demagnetized piece of steel does not differ in substance from the magnetized, only the arrangement of its molecules. And then one lifts up enormous weights when it's completely one-pointed. When all these molecules face one direction, it's a powerhouse. The other is scattered. So let not the double-minded man think that he will in any way receive from the Lord, you're told. The same first chapter. If the double-minded man comes, who is unstable in all his ways, let him not think he will receive anything from the Lord. What can you give a man who doesn't know what he wants? Rearrange the structure of your mind. That's all you do. It doesn't differ from Einstein's mind. There's only one mind. There's only one God. There's only one Lord. Listen to it. One body, one spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of us all, who is above all, through all, and in all. If he's in you, that's the same one with the one body, the one spirit. So I'm not using a different mind. It's the same mind, but differently arranged. So with what you have, all you need is exactly what you have, for you have the mind of God. It's not a different mind, the same mind. And you simply rearrange the mind by a mere assumption. What would the feeling be like were it true? that I am now the man that I want to be, now the woman that I want to be. But it's added, but persevere. You must persevere in it. If I call you now and you answer, one thing. Well, will you respond an hour later to the same call? Then if you persevere, you will. If now, an hour later, you think of yourself as you now, when you dare to assume that you are now the man that you want to be, an hour later, are you still assuming that state? If you're not persevering. You are the hearer who looked into the mirror with his natural face, and he saw it. Then he went his way and at once forgot what he looked like. So if 1 hour from now you're not still assuming that you are the man that you want to be, you've forgotten. You are the hearer and not the doer. And he warns us of the vast difference between being a hearer and being a doer. The doer acts. God only acts and is in existing beings or men. So bear in mind that your wonderful world is not bounded by your senses. You perceive far, far more than your sense, no matter how acute it is, could discover. Your senses can't discover what now you're capable of assuming that you are. Your senses dictate what reason will allow. And your reason and your senses are bound together. Go beyond it. For what you now know from experience, what you know from the past, will not be what you will know when you know more than you now know. But having done it and proven it, I know more than I did when I was bounded by my senses. When I couldn't get out of a certain island on time to meet a commitment in Milwaukee, I knew what I did in the army. I simply applied the identical thing, and I got out. When there was a long, long waiting list, thousands waiting for all the islands, and only 2 little ships, not big ships, 2 small little ships, one carrying not more than 60-odd passengers, and one carrying 120, and thousands waiting, and they only came once a month into the island. One every 32 days, and one every 3.5 weeks. How long would it take to get them all out? I didn't ask anyone a favor. Didn't ask my brother, who was a powerful businessman in the island. He criticized me for not arranging passage back to America when I left America. But that's the place where you should have done it. That's the powerhouse of the world, New York City. That's where all these things are done. And you dare to leave New York City when you could arrange a round trip, and you come here on a one-way ticket? Well, I didn't ask any favors of him or any favors of any member of the family. I simply did exactly what I did in the army. And in 24 hours, I was called by the Alcoa company and given my passage over thousands who were waiting. Isn't my concern why she did it, or why someone else didn't get it in preference to mine? My name is down at the very bottom. I wasn't at the top. I'm at the bottom of the list. It isn't my concern. I look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and I persevered. I sat in a chair in my hotel room, and there I sat in the chair, and as soon I am next to the boat, I'm climbing up the gangplank. Just before we had a deep water harbor, so you had to go off the seal up maybe a half mile or a mile to sea on a little tender, and then take the gangplank and go up to the ship. So I felt myself bobbing as you would on the ocean, and then moving up the gangplank. I could smell the rawness of the sea. Got up to the top, my mind wandered, I brought it back down again and did it all over again. It wandered, brought it back down again, kept on doing it over and over until finally I did it. I fell sound asleep sitting in the chair in the act of doing. Next day, Alcoa calls me and gives me my passage for my wife and my little girl. So I'm telling you from experience, it doesn't fail, but we must not simply be hearers of the word. We must be doers of the word. For if you are a hearer and not a doer, you deceive yourself, he tells you. For we are the operant power. This law doesn't operate itself. It doesn't care if you're good, bad, or indifferent. Look around the world. Who would think that tonight someone serving life sentence in our jail is the same mind that sits in the White House? Who would think the one who sits now in the Vatican, that mind of the Pope is the same mind of the one who is groveling on his belly, trying to kiss his hand? So on Sunday, there'll be Palm Sunday, and they'll do all these things on Palm Sunday, the Holy Palms. And then comes Friday, then comes Sunday. And all this will go on and have all the show, fabulous show. And he who is being born on the backs of strong, strapping men does not differ from those who are his slaves bearing him. The same mind, but they have rearranged their mind to be slaves. And he has arranged his mind to be the Father, to be Papa, the great Pope. Same mind. There is only one mind in the world. There aren't two minds. That's why I can tell you, I know that when he stands before you, he will know you as his Father. And you will know him as your Son. And because I know him as my Son, are we not one mind? Are we not one being? When the same being who called me Father will one day call you Father, are we not the same Father? The same mind, the same spirit, the same body, without loss of identity. So I'm telling you tonight, try it. Try it every moment of time. You know tonight what you want to be. I don't care what you want to be. It's simply a rearrangement of the mind. And you rearrange the mind not through any study and any effort. It's simply a mere assumption. What do I want to be? Get it clear in my mind's eye. Well, then assume that I am it. Listen to the words in the book of Joel. Let the weak man say, I am strong. Let the weak man say, I am strong. That's in the book of Joel. Jehovah God. That's what the word would mean, Joel. You're called upon when you are dumb to assume that you are exactly what you want to be. Not dumb because you don't want to be that. You want to be as free as the wind. Well, assume that you are. May I tell you in a way that no one knows you'll become it. But you must persevere. And the word perseverance is true. If I don't believe it, well then 1 second later, I've turned back to my former state and become once more Lot's wife, the pillar of salt. Salt is a preservative. In the old days, the only way to preserve something is to salt it. Not so long ago, when I was a little boy, we caught fish, an enormous quantity of fish, because we didn't have these enormous feats catching our fish. So we had fish to burn, literally burn. If they didn't get in before, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, what did they have? They could either put it onto the dung heap and make dung out of it, or clean it up and salt it. So they cleaned it up and salted it. It would keep indefinitely, for we had no refrigeration. So you salted the fish. Now we could have salt flying fish, if you wanted it that way. But fish that were not consumed by sundown was discarded. Use it for bait the next day, or use it in the dung heap and fertilize the fields with it. So salt is a preservative. So when Lot's wife was turned to salt, she turned back and went back to her former state. And that is all that it means. You look back and became a pillar of salt. You turned back to the state you said you would leave behind you. And looking back, you were salted. You were preserved in it. So turn away from what you really want to be. Turn back, you're going to be salted in it. So I ask you to leave what you are unless you like what you are. There's portions of what you are today that you like. All right, wonderful. There are other portions that you do not like. Well, you don't have to give up everything in your living room when you rearrange the structure of it. Certain pieces that you'll keep. You may change this location, but you'll keep it. The same thing is true with the structure of the mind. You keep certain things and you let other things go. Take friends in your world who are not doing well, rearrange them in your mind's eye, and they're doing well. So put that part of the structure in your mind's eye. Rearrange the entire structure and dare to assume that it's true and walk in that assumption. And that assumption, though at the moment is denied by reason and denied by your senses, if you persevere in it, it will harden into fact. This is the law of Scripture, that I came not to abolish, but to fulfill the Jewish law and the Jewish prophets. For there was no other Scripture in the first century but the Jewish Scriptures. So the word Jew is not placed before it to qualify it, but the only Scripture that he knew. He came to fulfill the Jewish law. He reinterpreted the law psychologically and showed them exactly how it's done. So go out and do not abolish anything, simply fulfill it. Fulfill the law and fulfill the prophets. The prophets, when they're fulfilled, that's done by sheer grace. That comes. That comes by prophets. And no one's going to stop it, may I tell you. But you could go on living in a state that you do not wish in this world. But in spite of that, you will still receive the promise, because it isn't given to the one who is rich and deny the one who is poor. But why remain poor and bat your head out morning, noon, and night against the inevitable blows in this world? I hope you do not wish money for the sake of money, but if you need money, well, then apply this law. What would the feeling be like if it were true that I was now free of this pressure, free of it? Dare to assume that you are, and then persist in that assumption, and that assumption will harden into reality. So this is my lesson tonight. I think you have found it a very practical one, but I must remind you, you can either be the hearer of what you heard tonight and not the doer. It is my hope that you will be the doer of what you heard tonight. And that when you leave here in the assumption, not wait until you get home. Leave here in the assumption that you are already the man, the woman that you want to be. And then between here and home, think of the man that you have assumed that you are, and that assumption spring in your mind constantly. You are that man. Go to bed in that assumption. Maybe this night, as it did with me in the army, something will come, and a voice will speak. And when vision breaks forth into speech, the presence of deity is assured. And maybe you will have confirmation that what you have dared to assume is. I know in my case it came that way. But it will come whether it breaks forth into speech or not, if you persist in the assumption.